The New Orleans Saints have picked up Brian Brzez's fifth-year option, tying him to the team through at least 2027. We have all of that and more today for you on Saints Daily, your home for everything to do with the black and gold. My name is Tim, and let's jump right into the Brian Brzee story. Brian Brzee is coming off of a bit of a down year compared to his career. In his 3 years, last year was the least amount of sacks that he did get as a pass rusher on the interior defensive line, which is his specialty. The team did bring in, again, a run stuffing specialist, not what Brian Brzee is known for. So he was not on the field as often as you would expect him to be in a 3-4 defense with his skill set. However, 2.5 sacks, again, being the lowest. The previous year, he had 7.5 sacks. In his rookie year, he had 4.5 sacks. So interior wise, those are some great numbers. If you can get 5 sacks from a defensive tackle, you are doing really well with your defensive tackle. So I don't think anybody's upset with that whatsoever. He did miss 2 games last year, and he also is a phenomenal special teams player. If anybody can remember him jumping over the line, almost breaking his ankles, but still blocking a field goal attempt. This contract will put him, he right now is making 3.9 million in 2026, and then in the 2027 season, he will get a very big pay increase up to $14 million, just under that $14 million cap hit. That would put him 23rd currently in the 2027 season for salary. So you could do worse, you could do better. 23rd feels about right, maybe, for what you're getting out of Brian Brzee. He would be right in between DJ Jones on the Broncos, who would be ahead of him, and BJ Hill on the Bengals, who would be below him. There's obviously some names both above and below that are, very enticing names to look at. Uh, Obviously, rookie contracts and stuff like that do play in, as well as when an extension is signed. This is not something that I'm surprised about. I actually think if you're going to get a player at defensive tackle, if you're going to sign a free agent or whatever you're going to be doing, if you want a player that can provide what Brzee can provide, $14 million is around what you would expect. He's familiar with the staff. He's a year into the scheme change, which for some players, the scheme change was fantastic. The edge players, Chase Young, Cam Jordan, both looked like they were the best versions of themselves at times. And it's something that doesn't allow defensive tackles to get that much pressure on the quarterback. It's just how a 3-4 is run. So there are obviously going to be opportunities for 4 down linemen, and some subsets, dime nickel, that are going to be run, especially if this team does go with a defensive back in the first round. You want to get as much talent on the field as you possibly can, which might mean taking linebackers out or edge rushers out, that are specifically edge rushers and not, the actual safety linebacker, outside linebacker, defensive end kind of setup. So you do have ability to utilize him more. This is a guy who lost 2 games last year, so he was only playing in 15 instead of 17, so that also contributes. But at the end of the day, 2.5 sacks has got to be a disappointing number for both him and the team, and something that I think he's going to build off of. Worst case scenario, the Saints just move on from him after 2027, but I think you get a starter at $14 million a year on your defensive line, and it kind of doesn't force a pigeonholed pick in the first 2 days of the draft, forcing you to take a defensive tackle. The one thing about this that is always under discussed is the fact that the Saints still do have Vernon Broughton on their roster. This is a guy who was familiar with the coaching staff that was brought in from his college days. Very, very highly regarded by the coaching staff, and someone who was apparently doing very good in practices before he did end up getting hurt. So he's somebody that if the rest of the draft class has anything to say about the talent that they drafted, he also might end up being somebody that does take that leap forward and maybe pushes Brzee out a little bit if that is what would end up happening. So again, this really could just be a fifth-year option. Get him on the team for one more year, so that way you don't have to force a pick. You have your room, assuming everybody's healthy. You're happy with your room. However, this did get me thinking about Caleb Banks, the defensive tackle from Florida. This is a guy that not too long ago, early February, he was getting mocked in the top 15, top 20 picks very, very regularly. For those who haven't been following him, he did participate in the combine. He did also, unfortunately, re-aggravate a recurring foot injury that he keeps having throughout his entire college career, and now he had to have surgery on it earlier, which is pushing him down the draft boards. His combine time and just the stats in general are a very intriguing prospect who does have the production to back it up. He's 6'6", 327 pounds, and every bit of that, if you've seen any Florida games or Florida tape, he is a man amongst boys at times. I mean, he is a big dude. He ran a 5.0440, which at that size is unbelievable. He had a 32-inch vertical and a 9.6 broad jump. So his numbers from the combine were actually fantastic. And if it wasn't for the foot injury and the surgery, I could see him being someone that would be a sneaky move up candidate, maybe actually drafted in the top 10 picks, maybe even before the Saints if that didn't happen. The issue is this is a reoccurring foot injury. This is at least the third time that I could find that he had an injury to this foot. He is expected to have a full recovery and be ready by June, so he shouldn't be missing any time. But at some point in time, you have to look at a guy who's 6'6", 327, has reoccurring foot issues, and wonder about longevity and just initial availability. And this is a trap that has gotten the Saints in trouble before. They've drafted the insanely large, insanely athletic players. Think of a Teron Armstead, one of the best left tackles in the NFL any given Sunday when he was healthy. And unfortunately, especially as his career went on, that was a lot less of an option of him being healthy. And sometimes some guys are just so big and so athletic that their body shouldn't be able to do what it does, and the wear and tear and everything that does happen throughout practice, throughout a season, postseason, training camp, the entire process, it can end up hurting that guy's long-term potential because you shouldn't be able to be 6'6" and run a 5.0440. You shouldn't be able to do that. That's 6'6", 327. You shouldn't be able to be that athletic. So with all this being said, there are a lot of mock drafts that have him outside of the first round. There are some mock drafts that have him outside of the second round. And it's a curious spot because as we're talking about the defensive interior with Brian Brzee, with Vernon Broughton, this is a guy that at what point does the fall justify the pick? Is it second round? If he falls to the second round as a guy that was a top 15 talent, is it worth it? I mean, look at, the cornerback Will Johnson last year, who had a slide due to a potential knee issue. And he ended up playing last year for the Cardinals, did extremely well. He was someone who was projected to go in the top 15, and assuming they get at least 8 years out of him, that pick is worth it. So at what point does a Caleb Banks slide make sense for the Saints to take? If he slides out of the second round, honestly, if he slides towards the latter half of the second round, this would be someone who I would love for the Saints to trade up and grab before anybody else can. Because at the end of the day, the draft is a crapshoot. It is. It's you don't ever really know. So medical issues can be a immediate this guy is off my board. Also, it could be justified. There are plenty of players that you look at in the history of the NFL who have reoccurring injuries in college who would otherwise be a first round pick, fall, and then their career doesn't end up being what you would have expected it to be because they were right to be worried about those injuries. So it's a double-edged sword, but to me, the talent absolutely justifies the pick in the second round. And if he falls to the second round, latter half of the second round, maybe the third round, that is someone who I would 100% want the Saints to trade up to get. As we're talking about trade ups and draft processes and everything, I thought it would be fun to look back at all of the draft classes that the Saints have had since 2020, just the first three rounds. Because if you think of what the Saints have done recently, and not being maybe as good of a team as you would want them to be, not making the playoffs, very, very top heavy with no depth, right? And that's a lot of salary cap and drafting issues. A lot of fans are starting to think that this team doesn't draft well in general. And if you look at the total draft picks and who was drafted in those first 3 rounds, it kind of tells a different story. There are misses, obviously. That's gonna happen with any team. But since 2020, in the first round, the Saints have selected in order, and I do have this on another screen. I'm going to read it because I can't memorize it as much as I wish I could. Kelvin Banks, Tali Fuaga, Brian Brzee, Chris Olave and Trevor Penning, Peyton Turner, and Cesar Ruiz. Out of that list, Peyton Turner immediately stands out. Complete bust, did not meet that first round pick selection status whatsoever, right? Ruiz, I don't think that's a bad pick. I think he hasn't been what you wanted him to be, but he is a starter in the NFL. He plays like sometimes when he's playing, he makes mistakes. Seems like he struggles with stunts and some things interior whenever he's not next to his continuity guys and McCoy and whoever's playing right tackle. Hopefully Tally Fuaga can stay healthy all year. But I wouldn't say that was a miss. Trevor Penning, miss. Huge miss. I never understood that one since the get-go. I never understood trading for a random first round pick in the middle of the first round, right? I mean, this wasn't a guy that was like a top 3 pick. This was like a low, I don't remember exactly what he went, like 10, 11 or something like that. The Saints knew that they were going to go left tackle. They knew they had a hole there. They knew they were going to go tackle. They just said, let's just trade up and whoever's there, we're going to take. Before the draft starts, before they knew who was going to be available at that pick, they decided to just trade up with a blanket trade up. I believe it was with the Eagles, because I know they ended up getting one of the Saints picks to trade up one spot to get Jalen Carter, and I think it was that one, but the Saints also, I think, traded up to get Chris Olave in that same draft. Maybe that was Eagles pick. Regardless, I never understood why that was a decision that was made. That was a huge miss. But I would say Olave was not a miss, right? Brian Brzee, jury's still out. I really like the player in terms of the pass rush ability. He does need to work on his run stopping ability. I mean, that's not when you're a defensive tackle, you have to be good at that. You do. And there were times last year that I thought he looked really good on his run defense, and there were times last year where he was getting bullied, and it wasn't even a double team take him out. Sometimes it was literally just the guard got him and he couldn't break away. So he does need to work on that. Again, I wouldn't call that a missed pick either. Tally Fuaga and Kelvin Banks right now seem like they're hits overall as long as they can stay healthy and continue to ascend. So first round, 5 offensive picks, 2 defensive picks. And to no one's surprise, 6 picks were linemen. 4 on offense, 2 on defense, right? The only player from that list that was not a trench player is Chris Olave. So, team definitely has a way of drafting, going offense in the first round, trenches in the first round, and then not, addressing the skill positions in that first round outside of Chris Olave. Another side note is that the 2022 draft had 2 picks. That was the Chris Olave, Trevor Penning draft. So first round for the last 5 years, overall, I would say they've done a good job. Second round pick, Tyler Shuck, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Foskey, Alontae Taylor, Pete Werner. There was no second round pick in 2020. And this one on offense, 4 on defense, and only 1 lineman. So again, kind of a trend. Went offense in first round, very heavily on defense in the second round. Second round picks again, outside of Isaiah Foskey, they're all hits. I mean, if you get a starter in your second round, you hit. Absolutely. Tyler Shuck at this point in time looks like he might be a franchise quarterback. Yes, there's still work to be done, but that's a hit. Kool-Aid McKinstry, again, still a jury out. Is he a cornerback 1 or is he just a very good cornerback 2? That's a hit in the second round. Alontae Taylor just got paid because he was a fantastic player on the New Orleans Saints. And then Pete Werner is a starter in the NFL. And up until he had some struggles, I think, with the 3-4 defense, he started to look a lot stronger towards the end of the year. I know he lost snaps to Stutzman. going to be interesting to see how the linebacker room plays out with Stutzman coming back, with Warner coming back, and then Caden Ellis taking that Demario Davis role. Maybe they draft a linebacker. So we'll see what happens with Warner. He might become a player that is a trade candidate, cap casualty candidate. Who knows? But I'm going to keep my eye on Warner. But again, outside of one pick out of the five, all hits. Third round, Vernon Broughton, jury's still out on him. Sanker, hit. Kendre Miller, it wasn't for the injuries, but due to the injuries, I have to say that's a miss at this point in time. But if it wasn't for the injuries, that's a huge hit as well. Paulson Adebo, hit. Zach Bond, hit for the wrong team. Adam Troutman, again, for a third round pick, tight end. He's on his second contract with Denver. Got to be a hit. So reviewing all these draft classes back to 2020, it's not as bad as you might think it is. It's easy to remember some of those other, earlier the classes before that, but this is a core of people that are mostly still on this team or have left and gotten paid, right? And it's always a good scenario because then you start getting comp picks whenever your draft picks leave and they get paid, and you can get a comp pick here or there for that. You can always make sure to, identify areas and that you're good at drafting, right? The Saints overall, looking at this pick with a lot with this list here with Kool-Aid, Alontae Taylor, and Paulson Adebo being the three corners, as well as looking at Sanker in the third round. Secondary seems to be a spot where I'm going to just trust that this team knows what they're doing when they're drafting, at least in the first three rounds. Again, I just thought it'd be kind of fun to look at these previous drafts, kind of put some perspective as we're about 2 weeks away from the 2026 NFL draft to maybe continue to trust the process a little bit. I am probably way too lenient when it comes to my opinion on Mickey Loomis. I've never been a Fire Mickey guy. I fully understand why people are frustrated or were frustrated with him. We can always get into those later on. Let me know in the comments what you think about Mickey. Is he redeeming himself? Is this something that the Saints should be moving on from? Let me know. I'm always very interested to see what everybody thinks. And then finally, I do want to go over the latest on Alvin Kamara. There's not much updates for this, but I did think it was worth bringing up on Easter Sunday that Alvin Kamara did continue to host his youth football camp. About 200 players did go to the football camp this year. So 200 kids went to the youth football camp. Again, held Easter Sunday, so very recently. And on a podcast, Nick Underhill mentioned, I think he mentioned that he actually talked to Kamara that he is basically planning on playing. He's acting like he's playing. He's going through his process. There's been really no word on anything. And again, just to bring in the financials of the Kamara situation and why I'm very interested in everything. He is currently the sixth highest cap hit at the running back position. The Saints have the most expensive running back room. I don't think Kamara's coming back on the current contract that he's at. It just doesn't make sense to bring him back to play 50-50 with Travis Achan or maybe even less at his current salary. So I'm assuming if he comes back, and I hope he does, if he comes back, it's going to be at a discounted rate. There might be an ultimatum at some point, either sign this or we're going to have to release you kind of setup. And at that point, who knows what's going to go on. So really the latest on Alvin Kamara is he hosted a youth football camp on Easter Sunday. He did not make any comments about his contract. He seems like he's planning on playing for the Saints. And again, Kellen Moore's, when he's asked about Alvin Kamara, he sounds very non-committal, but very, very, very professional and very, he praises his work ethic and praises the human being and how much he means to the Saints and the city, but still very non-committal. So I'm not sure how this ends, but I thought it was worth calling out that he's still being Alvin. He's still doing what he usually does, even though there's not really a lot of clarity on his future with the team. So thought it was worth calling out. Definitely always, again, want to know your thoughts. I think this is something that gets settled after the draft. If the Saints draft Jeremiah Love or another running back in this draft class, I don't know if that I don't think that means Alvin Kamara is coming back, right? I think at that point you got to move on from Alvin Kamara. Just at some point, there's not enough people. There's not enough football to go around for every single running back that's in that room. Who knows what's going on with Kendra Miller? Who knows what's going on with Devin Neal? With any of the other running backs on the roster at this point. So if you draft a guy, I think that does potentially, unless he's a special teams only player, show that they are probably going to move on from Alvin Kamara. As always, everybody, I am very, very excited to see what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please press the subscribe button, drop a like, and share it with your friends. We'll catch you next time, Who Dat Nation.